Okay then. I do believe we are recording. Hail audience. Welcome to question and answer number 158. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and one of the co-hosts just walked away, as you can see back there. This is my beverage. And 158 clearly is not a prime number, so we don't even have to go there. So, we've got the standard middle path of questions today, about the usual like 35 or so. So, I guess we should just dive right into this and start answering questions. So, the first question is from Gnostic Rocker. And Gnostic Rocker says, I know you like Hume a lot, so the following is hypothetical speculation about similarities and differences in his philosophy and Buddhist philosophy, given that David Hume was skeptical about a permanent, fixed, unchanging self. One can assume he'd have appreciated the Buddha's teaching on anatta, but given that Hume also had a skeptical view of the absolute certainty of our understanding of cause and effect in the phenomenal sphere, what do you think he'd have made of Paticca Samuppada? I'm paraphrasing a quote from Professor A.J. Ayers. Let's go with Ayer. A.J. Ayers' analysis of Hume, which states, quote, cause and effect, unquote, considers Hume's view that the relation of cause and effect supplies the basis for our factual beliefs. Observation leads us to believe in connections between physical objects and events. The power and force of these connections are not observable, only the changes in spatio-temporal relations. Repeated observations create a habit of the mind, but are insufficient to prove a general relationship, as that would require observing every instance. This inductive process of forming expectations is merely sufficient to create the generalization that the future will resemble the past, unquote, again. Okay, yeah, David Hume, he was like a radical skeptic, and even, I think he's like the first philosopher that it occurred to actually question our certainty of cause and effect. So David Hume says we never really see causation. We just see something followed by something else. And just it's like this repeating pattern. So we say something causes that something else. You know, you see the axe coming down on the piece of wood. You don't actually see any causative force. You just see the axe coming down on the piece of wood, and the piece of wood splits into two. In fact, Hume even takes that even to our own mental processes. How, you know, we have the urge to move our arm, and then our arm moves. Still, we don't see the causation. We just see the urge, and then the moving arm. So he actually, using radical skepticism, casts doubt on our certainty of cause and effect. It's just an inference. He doesn't say that cause and effect doesn't really exist. He's just saying that we can't know that. We just have to infer it. So with regard to Buddhism and dependent co-arising, first of all, dependent co-arising isn't necessarily based on like physical cause and effect, or just like, let's go to Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's first philosophical work of note, his doctoral thesis when he was at the university, was The Fourfold Root of Sufficient Reason. And reason here, it doesn't mean logic, it just means the reason for something to happen. And like cause and effect was only one of these four causes. One was mathematical, I think. One was like geometrical. Like, for example, you've got a triangle with three equal sides. Necessarily, it's also going to have three equal angles. You know, it's not any kind of causation of, you know, the sides causing the angles to be a certain way. It's just like this logical or rational, or just, it's just the way it is. If you got a triangle that has three equal sides, it's also going to have three equal angles and vice versa. And then I think the fourth one was like psychological, that a person with a certain character is going to react to the same like stimuli in the same way until his character changes. So, I mean, even if we accept Hume's skepticism with regard to our certainty of cause and effect, still, that's not the only kind of causation that is possible with regard to dependent co-arising. In fact, my interpretation of dependent co-arising is it's not this temporal sequence of causes and effects, which is like the orthodox explanation of it in Theravada. It's more of a kind of a rational thing. If you've got, if this exists, then that exists. If this arises, then that arises. It's not like Jnanavira, famous eccentric existentialist English monk from the 1950s and 60s, said, dependent co-arising doesn't say this ceasing that arises. It means this arising that arises. So for Jnanavira and a lot of other Buddhists, it's all simultaneous, which wouldn't be like this temporal cause and effect anyway. So there are serious Theravada Buddhists who don't even interpret dependent co-arising to mean like this temporal sequence of causes and effects. It's like the fire triangle, like I was talking about in the previous Q&A. You've got these three necessary circumstances for fire. Fire is going to be there. It's not like, well, I guess in that case you could have like a cause, but it's really those three prerequisites. If they're there, fire is there. You could even argue whether or not those three conditions cause the fire. It's just those three conditions together at the same time are the fire. But it's more of a conditional kind of cause and effect in dependent co-arising. In my opinion, it's just, if you assume that this exists, then you also have to assume that that exists. A simple example would be if you assume that some object exists, you also have to assume that there is like a ground behind that. You got figure and ground. You've got this that has like an outline. It has limits, has boundaries, and so there has to be something else, even if it's just empty space around that, so that object being singled out causes the background of it. And it's not that this can of energy drink is causing everything else around it, but nevertheless this energy drink in my hand causes there to be like this energy drink shaped space that isn't the energy drink, if that makes any sense. But again, Hume wasn't insisting that there is no cause and effect. He was just putting into question our certainty of it. That we don't really experience cause and effect, we just infer it. And since the Buddha, when he's talking in words, is having to use conventional truth anyway, then I don't really see that there's necessarily a conflict between the Buddha and David Hume on this point. So, I'm not sure how well I answered the question. Let's see. Here's the actual question with the question mark at the end. What do you think Hume would have made of dependent co-arising? And I don't know. I mean, Hume was anti-Christian. He was one of the main characters, one of the most important characters in what is called the Enlightenment, or the Scottish Enlightenment, which is kind of an ironic name because they weren't really going for actual spiritual enlightenment. They were trying to free Western civilization from superstition, which mainly meant Christianity, and replace it with philosophy, which mainly meant science and like objectivity and empiricism and so forth. And I noticed that I'm lagging, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. But I'm sure we'll survive somehow. So Hume he didn't like Christianity, but what that would have implied with regard to his attitude to other religions like Buddhism, I don't know. It may be that he would have preferred Buddhism to Christianity, like many philosophers have. But then again, I mean, he lived in 18th century Scotland. So it's hard to say what his opinion on Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy would be. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. And I hope that this lag will resolve itself. Make sure that at least the microphone is working. Yeah, it is. Okay. So at least I'm still making noises. So next question. Let's see here. Okay, next question from Gnostic Rocker is as follows. Probably it's far too general a question to ask, but in your experience from all the Westerners you met in temples over the years, what are the main motivating factors for Westerners when they choose to become monastics? And I don't know if you've noticed or not, but it's really hot here in South Carolina today, very muggy, and I'm a little bit perspiry. And so I'm going to be chugging this beverage throughout the course of the beginning parts of this Q&A until I've chugged it all and it's gone. Probably should have chugged one whole one before I even started. So getting back to the question though, let's see, what are the main motivating factors for Westerners when they choose to become monastics? Well, I think there's like a generational change that has occurred and is occurring. Like my generation and the generation before me, like the hippie generation, the boomers. I'm kind of at the cusp between boomers and Gen X. But like my generation and the monks before me, at least half, it seems like, started off with psychedelics. You know, LSD, mushrooms, mescaline, that sort of thing. And we experienced heightened levels of consciousness, altered states of consciousness that really caused us to have like a higher perspective with regard to the supposed reality of this world we're living in. So then we started like getting interested in meditation techniques and other ways of like attaining the same like heightened consciousness without having to take the chemicals. Also, it was just kind of in fashion in earlier decades, like Ram Dass. You know, Ram Dass is really the one who started me on a spiritual path. And he was like a guru to the hippies. So there's kind of that too. Also, I assume there's a lot of like cynicism with regard to Western civilization in general, where if I had been raised in a different culture that was maybe more spiritually oriented, I might not have been inspired to become a monk. But Western civilization is so materialistic and so spiritually bankrupt that it wasn't really fulfilling this need that I had. And so I had to look elsewhere. You know, when I was a teenager, I've told the story before, you know, it's like when you're a kid, you just assume that adults know what's what. By the time I reached 16, it became painfully obvious that adults really don't know what's what, that they were just at least as messed up as I was. So I just went into open rebellion, got into lots of trouble. And then finally, I saw this youth counselor who gave me Ram Dass books to read. And I mean, it was clearly superior, sort of renunciation of the mainstream anyway, was clearly superior to either just he who dies with the most toys wins, or just constant rebellion and getting into trouble. So I assume there were quite a few like that. With regard to later generations, though, I think there's an increasing number of people who are just born into Buddhism in the West. You know, they've got maybe boomer or Gen X parents who were already interested in Buddhism. And so the kids are learning an interest in Buddhism from their own parents. So there's more of that, I suppose. But with regard to the younger generations of monks, I'm really not sure what the main reasons for them to become monks are. I mean, my generation and the generation before me, I had a pretty good idea, but I haven't really been talking to young monks lately, and I'm not as sure, although I do think that it's just Dhamma is just entering the mainstream more and more, so a lot of them are just being exposed to these ideas and accepting them as good ideas without having to go through the rebellion and the drug use and all that. So that's my answer to that question. I'm just going to move on to Gnostic Rocker's third question. And I do hope that the sound will catch up to the video. We were almost there. We were like maybe less than a second lag, and then it went back to lagging again. So, third question. When you returned to America and wandered from city to city in the robes of an ancient ascetic from India, I'm sure American people reacted to the attire in many different ways. But were you ever pleasantly surprised by any overtly kind reactions that showed a generosity of the human spirit or revealed a benign side of humanity? Well, that is like one of the main advantages of living in like a Democrat-run area, is that you can walk down the street barefoot with a toga, and some people will actually react positively, even though they're not Buddhist or anything, just because you're like non-conformist. You know, you're questioning authority or something, and it's just they see it as inclusive and enlightened and all this to be nice to someone like that. And so someplace like Bellingham, Washington, you just get lots of smiles, you know, just lots of friendly hellos walking down the street, that sort of thing. The people that disapprove of you, and of course they're there, you might get a dirty look, just a silent scowl, but they're not going to go out of their way to insult you, except for just a few cases. I mean, I probably received more like open contempt in Dharma halls in the West than out on the city streets or in like a grocery store or something, which was really striking to me. You know, it's like the average Western Buddhist, like 15 years ago in the West, you're more likely to find people who really don't like monks than you're going to find people who really don't like monks just at random walking down a city street. So that was kind of ironic to me, definitely counterintuitive. But I mean, there have been times when, you know, somebody would just come over and offer me something, you know, like I was waiting for a friend outside a grocery store, and somebody came up to me and just said, he asked about what I was doing, and I told him, and he was inspired to go into the store and buy me like a pint of apple juice or something, and came out and offered it to me. And I mean, every once in a while you meet somebody like that who really reacts positively. You know, it's just like there's this latent hunger for some sort of spiritual stimuli that they're just not getting. So that when they see a monk, you know, it's sort of like, you know, the Buddha's fourth sign that finally inspired him to renounce the world was seeing a monk. So it does have like a positive effect on some people. I mean, especially like Thai immigrants. You know, there was like these two ladies standing in front of a grocery store. I was just walking down the sidewalk in front of the store, and up ahead I see like these two ladies just excitedly standing there holding this bag of groceries. They saw me coming or something. They just ran in, bought some stuff, and ran back out and offered it to me. And they were just all excited. They said they hadn't had a chance to offer anything to monks since they came to America. So, I mean, there's that kind of thing. But I think the one thing that this brought to mind when I read this question would be, I was standing in some store, and there was this very new age young woman. I'd actually seen her before. And when she saw me in the store, she immediately kicked off her sandals and approached me barefoot, you know, like this. And I mean, that was like something that you'd see in Asia, and she wasn't even Buddhist. I mean, she was New Age. But my first year in America, when I was trying to live as kind of a free range Buddhist monk in America, at least half my supporters were New Age people. So, I mean, really, I do not like conversing much with New Age people because they're able to believe anything. Very soft-headed people. They might have really good heart, but heart is really their strong point, I guess. You know, it's New Age is not really a head-oriented system. So let's see here. I guess I answered that question, but there is a lot of goodness in people that does get overlooked, I think. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Psst, and I'm kind of have this sinking suspicion that this entire video is going to be lagging just between the video and the audio, and I don't know what causes that. I mean, everything's hooked up the way it's supposed to be, pretty sure. Check the connections on everything. Yeah. We'll just have to see how it goes. Usually it catches up after a while. So this next question is from Psst. And Psst says, since we're all potentially in the proverbial block of marble, where does the karma momentum begin or come from? Well, this is kind of a weird trick question. I mean, since everything is already in the block of marble, you're going to have statues that are moving in that block of marble. So it's the karma momentum is just what is necessary for a moving statue to exist, at least in our version of reality, our version of samsara. So in order for anything to exist for more than a trillionth of a second, there has to be some sort of continuity. And in our case, that continuity is like the momentum of our mental states, the momentum of our karma, the momentum of the perceptions that are differentiating imaginary statues from this uncarved block of stone. So I guess one way of saying it or explaining it is, in order for there to be a moving statue existing in this block of marble, that there's going to have to be something connecting one moment with the next, one position with the next. And that connecting principle, at least in our version of reality, is karma. And I don't know how well I explain that, but when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, it's really difficult to put answers into words. And there are some people who are just head-oriented, unlike New Age people, who just insist upon having rational explanations for things. And I mean, in a way, it's just an exercise in futility, because you're never going to understand reality by thinking about it. You can understand certain aspects of virtual reality by thinking about it, but the highest truth, the words, I mean, the name that can be named is not the eternal name. So let's see here. Where does the karma momentum begin or come from? Well, I mean, it comes from just the block of marble, and it doesn't really have a beginning or an ending, I suppose, other than just with regard to the illusion, because ultimately it is illusory. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Stefan. And Stefan says, I remember you mentioned you were working on creating a self-sustaining aquarium system. I'm curious, have you managed to get it running successfully, and how do you see its development going forward? Okay, well, I decided that I should feed my fish. I was originally going to have that aquarium back there be completely self-sustaining in accordance with my guru father fish, who says if you've got a well set up aquarium, you should not have to feed your fish. But I've got too much biomass of fish in there, too many fish for them to exist just on what is naturally arising in the aquarium. So, I mean, I could stop feeding that aquarium. I could stop putting any kind of food into that aquarium, just let it go. And it wouldn't just completely die. There would still be fish in there. There'd probably be a die-off of fish down to like the carrying capacity. So there'd be some cherry barbs in there, some algae eaters, because you don't feed the algae eaters anyway. And I'm not exactly sure what else. But probably at least half the fish in there would die if I stopped feeding them. On the other hand, I've got another aquarium over that way, and I can't really see what I'm doing because of the lag. But I've got this 10-gallon aquarium that I was going to use as a breeding tank for the gouramis, and then I put shrimps in there. It was just an invertebrate tank, and I probably should do another aquarium video for the updates on this. But at present, I've got 3 fish in there. 2 sparkling gouramis and a female dwarf gourami. There are only 3 fish in that aquarium, and probably that 10-gallon tank, I could just completely stop feeding it, and all 3 fish would survive. That they'd probably be fine. There would be probably a die-off of snails and shrimps, because those are like the 2 main kinds of creatures in that 10-gallon tank, is ram's horn snails and Neocaridina shrimp. And so probably there'd be a die-off of those down to the carrying capacity of the system. But the snails and the shrimp mainly can survive on just like the slippery stuff that grows in water on surfaces, the biofilm, which is mainly like bacteria and that sort of thing, microbes. So yeah, I mean, I could do it, but at present I like to have more fish and more shrimps, so I'm feeding them. But it is relatively well balanced. I really don't have to like do water changes all that much. Sometimes I do just for the heck of it, just to make sure. But really, it's a well-balanced system that's going on. Like back there, it looks pretty jungly right now. It took the one female dwarf gourami that is now in the 10-gallon tank I had back there, and just taking that one female fish out of that aquarium, putting it in a different aquarium, noticeably has changed the ecological balance of that 32-gallon tank back there. For one thing, there's lots of duckweed growing in there now, and lots of green hair algae that just wasn't there when the female dwarf gourami was in there just foraging and getting most of her food just from foraging and not eating the food that I was putting into the tank. But I guess all this is material for an aquarium video. So yeah, I guess the short answer, which it's now too late for, is that I could stop feeding both of my aquariums, and they would kind of have like a die-off, like a population crash of fish and like shrimps and snails, down till you had just a few of them that were able to survive off the plants and the microbes and so forth that are just living naturally in the tanks. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to cause a population crash. So I continue to put food into their tanks, small amounts, maybe 5 times a week. And then just take out the extra plant stuff, like duckweed and so forth. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Maximin. And Maximin says, did you meet your wife, or at least know of her, while still in robes? Yeah, I knew her for years before I stopped being a monk. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from RFS. And RFS says, in your experience, would most monks try harder during the rains retreat? Well, I think it is a tradition in Theravada Buddhism that during the rains retreat, the 3 months of the rains retreat, monks are supposed to stay in one place and do like more serious intensive practice. So in Burma, yeah, there'd be at least 5 or 10% increase in serious practice during the 3 months of the rains retreat. I mean, for me, it didn't really have much of an effect. I was just doing what I do, day after day, regardless of what month it was or anything like that. But yeah, I do think that most monks do try at least a little bit harder during the rains retreat. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Master Po. Master Po says, if I ever wrote an autobiography, I'd probably title it Learning to Laugh Mostly at Myself as the Proverbial Block of Marble Calls Me Back. If you, Panyobasa, decided to write an autobiography, what title do you give it? Well, I haven't really given much thought to it since I was a monk. When I was a monk, I was thinking if I wrote an autobiography, I'd call it Change and Separation. And then there'd be like a colon and then some subtitle. I guess it'd be called a subtitle, wouldn't it? Subtitle. But I don't know what the subtitle will be. But I was thinking as the main title of my autobiography back when I was a monk would be Change and Separation, going from the Buddhist statement in the text that with regard to all things near and dear to us, there is change and separation. So my autobiography would just be like a chronicle of the changes and separations of my life as I just move through one situation to another. But what I would call it now, if I wrote it now, it might have a different title. And I haven't really given it much thought. So, I mean, I'm not planning on sitting down and writing anytime soon. I'd have to be retired. I'd have to be a member of the leisure class again before I could sit down and write much of anything at this point. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from GameFap. And GameFap says, how common are immoral monks? Have you come across them often? How the Chinese head monk of the Kung Fu has 50 or so mistresses and is a billionaire and is now under official investigation. This seems to be a slap in the face of what Buddhism stands for. I mean, what would anybody do with 50 mistresses? I mean, that seems rather excessive. But, I mean, how common are immoral monks? It would depend on your definition of immoral. I mean, anyone who isn't fully enlightened is going to have at least a little bit of immorality. I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, it doesn't take much to be immoral. You know, to get angry is immoral, for example. To get lonely is immoral. I mean, for that matter, just being unhappy is pretty much immoral from a Buddhist point of view. And then there's the rules, and most monks, even serious conscientious monks, will break a rule every now and then, even if it's just by accident. So, how common are immoral monks? I mean, I'd have to know what you mean by immoral. Just, I mean, having 50 or so mistresses, they wouldn't even be monks anymore. I mean, you just have one mistress. I mean, if you have sex, then you're just not a monk anymore. You're automatically excommunicated. You are parajika. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a hard question to answer because I don't know where GameFAQ would draw the line between moral and immoral. I mean, telling lies is immoral. Just going with like the 5 precepts. But, I mean, a monk who makes confession, almost every monk who's making confession is telling a lie. Most confessions are like bogus confessions. Like, you know, the monks says, you know, I committed, you know, so-and-so offenses of various types. And then the person that you're making confession to says, do you see them? And then the monk says, yes, I see them. But generally you don't see them. At least like in Thailand, the official way, the traditional way of making confession is you just confess to every single category of offense, whether you've broken any rules or not. Which, I mean, when they say, do you see them? And you say, yes, I see them. Well, obviously that's not true because you're confessing offenses that you probably didn't even commit. Like Patidesaniya offenses. Nobody breaks Patidesaniya rules anymore. There's only 4 of them and they're very obscure. But in Thailand, Thai monks, make confession. They admit, they confess to breaking Patidesaniya rules. And then they're asked, do you see them? Do you see your offenses? Yes, I see them, but really they don't. And then you continue to say, the other monk says, well, in future, you should restrain yourself. And then in Burma, at least, the monk says, yes, sir, very good, sir, I will restrain myself. When really, they're just going to go out and keep breaking the same rules. Like if they're handling money, they're still breaking the rule because they haven't gotten rid of it. So, I mean, if you consider that sort of like essentially saying what isn't true deliberately, I mean, in a way, maybe it would pass as not lying simply because you're not really trying to deceive anybody, because the monk you're making confession to probably does exactly the same thing. He knows the score. But still, just like idle chatter, that kind of thing. I mean, that's immoral. That's in violation of the 5 precepts. So, I mean, how common are immoral monks? They're extremely common, but so long as you have like a very stringent idea of Buddhist morality. But when you get to like monks that are parajika, that are not even real monks anymore, they're just pretending to be monks. They're still wearing monk's robes, even though they've, done something that got them excommunicated. Then, there's still, I mean, I hope it's less than 1%, but still it's not really a large amount, like monks that are like seducing women and so forth. I've heard more about that sort of thing in Thailand than in Burma, partly because the Thai are they're a more sensual kind of people. Than the Burmese are just very Spartan, very stoic. They really, even the lay people don't have an extremely high regard for sensual pleasure, it seems like. So, I mean, if you consider monks that handle money to be immoral, it's against the rules, definitely. There's in the official story of the Second Council, when one of the main issues debated at the Second Great Council was whether monks should be allowed to handle money. And in the story, there's the monk who was one of the people that was insisting that monks shouldn't handle money. And he's getting into trouble because the other monks are trying to punish him because they want to handle money and all this. He actually quotes some saying of the Buddha that I don't know if it's even in the Tipitaka right now, other than this one, canonical quote of what he was saying. He was saying that monks who handle money are, they're like completely delusional. They're just bound with the chains of their own greed. They're no better than animals, etc. Well, I mean, you could call that immoral, I guess, if they're like wallowing in darkness and bound by the chains of their own greed and no better than animals. I mean, is that immoral? If so, all monks who handle money, which is most of them, would be immoral. So GameFap really needs to be more precise in his questioning with regard to immoral monks. Like, where do you draw the line? And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And Romeo says, I realize that Buddhism prescribes emotional detachment, but I'm wondering to what extent this may be unhealthy or even inhuman. After all, isn't experiencing emotional pain and the depth that it engenders part of what makes us human and which sets us apart from AI, androids, and such, or what differentiates a normal person from a psychopath? Well, whether practicing intensive Dhamma is unhealthy or not is debatable. I mean, in some ways it is unhealthy. Like you're just living alone out in a forest being bitten by parasites and so forth, just enduring hunger and thirst and heat and cold and sickness and all that. That could be considered unhealthy. But then again, spiritually, it's healthy. So it might be physically, when to some degree, even like psychologically unhealthy at lower levels, like the emotional level or something, but spiritually it's more healthy than wallowing in delusion like most people are doing. But when you get to inhuman, then certainly if you're going to be practicing Dhamma at the highest level, you're going to be inhuman. At least you're going to transcend your humanity, even if you don't abandon it altogether. That being human and just kind of wallowing in samsara, then yeah, I mean, if part of being human is suffering, for example, then yeah, you want to stop being human, which is kind of a difficult issue for a lot of people who like being human or have respect for humanity. But I mean, that's just the ancient Indian approach. To live in this world is not so good. So you want to get out. And in order to get out of samsara, you have to get out of humanity. So, let's see. I mean, a monk practicing intensive Dhamma is not going to be the same as an android, and he's certainly not going to be a psychopath. Or if he is a psychopath, he's going to be a benevolent psychopath. Not all sociopaths are evil. There are some sociopaths, like just really successful worldly people. I've read that there's a relatively high percentage of like sociopaths who are surgeons, a relatively large number of sociopaths that are very successful in business, that kind of thing. And they're not necessarily going to be, killing and torturing and all this kind of stuff. But I think a sociopath is someone who really has no empathy, and like a Buddhist, like a monk who is practicing at a high level, he's certainly going to have empathy. And I don't think an android would have empathy either. I mean, you're just kind of transcending your own boundaries so that you're kind of getting into a more of a group mind kind of a situation, so that if you hurt someone, you can feel that you're hurting yourself, in a sense. So let's see here. Did I answer the question? Let's see. After all, isn't experiencing emotional pain and the depth that it engenders part of what makes us human? Yeah, but who says being human is all that great? I mean, that's certainly, from a Buddhist point of view, being human really isn't all that great. To exist in samsara is suffering. And if you want to stop that, then you're going to have to stop being a human being. So I'm just going to move on to Romeo's next question, which is as follows. I'm also wondering, to what extent should the practice of mindfulness bleed into the experiencing of emotions that come up in everyday life? Take, for example, the emotion of sadness or sorrow. When you, as a Buddhist, hear a nostalgic song that triggers a fond, sentimental memory, or watch a tearjerker movie with your sweetheart, or just feel deep sadness for whatever reason, do you viscerally let yourself have a deep cry? Or do you note sadness arising and let it go in a detached way, as you would during a mindfulness meditation? Well, I mean, in a way that's kind of a false dichotomy. There's more of a spectrum involved. But it reminds me of something that Paul Lowe said once. It's in one of his books. He said essentially, I mean, he's referring to the mind-body system. So he says, if the system wants to cry, let it cry. It is not you. There is no need to get involved. If the system wants to laugh, let it laugh. And so, I mean, you can still go through all the motions of being a human, while at the same time not really being primarily identified at that level. You could be, I mean, you could still be observing it while it's still going on. So, what's the actual question here? Do I viscerally let myself have a deep cry? No, I haven't really wept in a long time. I think the last time I really just cried was the day I got rid of my dog Genghis. Because we were moving to a different house and it just wasn't going to work out there. So that's been a couple years, I think. Let's see. Or do I note sadness arising and let it go? Yeah, I mean, just because you're being mindful of it doesn't mean that it stops. And just kind of letting it go doesn't mean that it stops. I mean, once you've got some momentum going, you've got like the adrenaline or whatever it is going through your system, then it's your body's just going to go with it. Your body mind system is just going to go with that. And so you can just kind of watch while it's happening. There's one aspect of your mind that's a dispassionate observer, while this other part of you is yelling or crying or whatever it is. So in a way, it's kind of it's a spectrum. It's not just robotic arahant or person just completely wallowing in samsara. There is a spectrum. So, not that I'm saying an arahant would not really be robotic. Yeah. It's just kind of built into me that, like, yesterday at work, I was having a bad day at work. It's just this hectic clusterfuck going on, which is often the case. And I was just driving my forklift to go find something. And I'm just kind of just letting myself breathe and calming down. I'm away from the clusterfuck of this trailer I'm trying to load, just driving off, to some other place to get some freight. And I'm just kind of watching, the state that my body was in, the state that my mind was in, just kind of observing it. And that's really the best you can do sometimes, especially if it's not immediate. It's not you're catching it as soon as it arises. It's like already been going on for, X number of minutes. And then, you're kind of like, all right, let's just get back to the center here. Let's try and ground ourselves here now. And then you just start noticing, this human unhappiness or agitation, aggravation, that kind of thing. It's so what if it makes you human? It's not a good situation. So, you're better off rising above it. You're better off just detaching from it and observing it. And also, just by detaching from it and observing it, then it helps it to subside. Just because you're having a bad day doesn't mean you should wallow in a bad day because you're a member of the species Homo sapiens. That's just silly. So, I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Austin. And Austin says, how do you respond to a Hindu saying Atman is eternal and absolute? And we're still lagging. We've been going at this for 47 minutes, it seems. And it could be this entire video is just going to be lagging. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what to do. I'm not going to just start over at this point. So getting back to Austin's question, though, for the most part, if a Hindu is saying Atman is eternal and absolute, in most cases, I wouldn't even bother to respond. If I see something like that, it's going to be on the internet anyway. I don't really hang out with Hindus all that much. And even if I did hang out with a Hindu, I doubt that he's just going to look me right in the eye and say Atman is eternal and absolute. So, yeah, for the most part, I just wouldn't respond. But if I were required to respond to saying, to a Hindu saying Atman is eternal and absolute, I'd probably have to get into, like reifying the absolute and how really the absolute cannot be put into words, and any kind of statement you'll make about it is going to be invalid. Even, the Hindus talk about nirguna Brahman as the absolute, which means essentially ultimate reality, which has no discernible qualities. So you can't really make a positive statement about it. Even to call it nirguna is already making some kind of assertion. So, yeah, I guess we'd have to go down that route, I guess. We'd have to first talk about how the absolute is beyond words. But because we're humans, we try to explain things in words. And so then you have to stray into like what is ultimately untrue or just invalid. And then it's a matter of convenience, whether you're going to say, whether the absolute exists or doesn't exist, whether it has this quality or that quality. And I've got a dog staring at me, trying to get my attention down there. And so, it'll eventually just get to the point of, the issue of reifying the absolute, and try to convey to this Hindu, this theoretical Hindu, that not reifying the absolute is probably more valid of an approach to the absolute. Just apophatism, being apophatic, just not trying to explain it in words because words won't touch it. That approach is probably wiser than making these assertions about how something is eternal and absolute and so forth. But it probably wouldn't be worth the effort unless maybe I had some Hindu that was just really wanting to discuss this with me, which thus far in my life has not happened. And so I'm going to move on to Austin's next question, which is, Buddhism holds to the idea of the impermanence of all things, but is paticca the law of change, a constant permanency? Well, I mean, that's just like the Pythagorean theorem, or 2 + 2 = 3, or even just the number 3, or anything like that. A triangle, if it has 3 equal sides, will also have 3 equal angles. I mean, is that eternal? I mean, it only exists if someone's thinking about it. And so this person will think about it in this way, and then maybe tomorrow another person will be, in some other part of the world thinking about it in some other way. It's not the same thing. It's just like, I don't know how to exist is to be perceived, as Berkeley used to say, esse est percipi. And if nobody's perceiving it, then, I mean, it just doesn't exist. So it's not really permanent. And even so, even if there's like somebody thinking about it all the time, like the number 3, in all likelihood, that there's always people, 24/7 thinking of the number 3 somewhere in this world. So that doesn't mean that 3 is eternal and that it exists as some universal or platonic ideal up in heaven. It's just that you've got a particular instance of somebody thinking about 3. You've got a different particular instance of somebody thinking about like a slightly different kind of 3. And there's no really underlying essence that's unifying all that. So the same applies to dependent co-arising, paticca samuppada, or whatever it is, some law of physics, maybe. That, I mean, it's like individual cases that are all like conveniently classified under this general category of dependent co-arising, or whatever the general category is going to be. And the general category isn't permanent, because that's just a mental construction. So, yeah, I would not say that dependent co-arising or paticca samuppada is a constant permanency. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita. And Siddhartha Lohachita says, do you know the Aristotelian hypothesis from the pure act, or actus purus in Latin, developed later by philosophic Catholicism? Well, I'm not real familiar with it, no. But then Siddhartha Lohachita continues here with an explanation, I think. If everything in the world arises and depends on causes and conditions, is there, in your view, something that is completely independent of these conditions, something that is pure in the sense of having no potentiality or change, that for the Christians, the actus purus, it's God or the ultimate reality? According to Aristotle, act is that which is fully real and is not in the process of change or development. Well, you could say that, like, the absolute in Buddhism is like that. You could say nibbana is like that, especially, or nirvana, especially if you're a Mahayana Buddhist, or the one mind. The Mahayana Buddhists have a number of synonyms for the absolute. So yeah, I mean, you could say that, nirvana is eternal. I mean, if you're going to be putting it into words, it has no potentiality or change, that kind of thing. So, I mean, you could say that nirvana is just the absolute, like the essence of all things. It's like the uncarved block of stone. And samsara is all the potential conditional virtual statues that exist in that uncarved block of stone. But, I mean, you're still wallowing in samsara, talking in those terms, because, I mean, it's just beyond that. It's beyond conception. So, I mean, you could say that the absolute in Buddhism, assuming that you consent to there even being an absolute in Buddhism, that it would be like that. Just kind of pure and just unchanging, and in a way kind of the foundation or ultimate cause of the world. But still, Buddhists wisely had this tradition of not reifying the absolute. So you just get to the cliff's edge and you got to stop. So, on this, moving on to Siddhartha Lohachita's next question, which is along the same vein here. Both the Aristotelian actus purus and the unmoved mover concepts in Thomas Aquinas' philosophy, as well as Buddha's paticca-samuppada, are profound and coherent philosophical frameworks. However, they rest on very different assumptions. The unmoved mover serves as the first cause of motion, while the actus purus describes God as pure actuality without potentiality from which our world emanates. Ultimately, neither framework can conclusively prove itself as the absolute truth for everyone. Given this, how can we evaluate or reconcile these different worldviews? Well, I think the actus purus is a wiser, more sophisticated theory than the unmoved mover serving as the first cause. From a Buddhist point of view, there is no first cause. It's just been like an eternal illusion based on ignorance, which has no beginning. And the ignorance itself isn't eternal because it's a different ignorance from one moment to the next. So, I mean, dependent co-arising, paticca-samuppada, I mean, that's, in a way, it's different because paticca-samuppada is not the absolute. You know, that's just what causes, you know, things in samsara to occur. But it's all within the context of illusion or delusion, ignorance. So paticca-samuppada doesn't apply to the absolute. It only applies to this worldly phenomenon. So, see, how can we evaluate or reconcile these different worldviews? Well, I mean, you're probably better off not even bothering. And it looks like we've got still like a 2 or 3 second lag. Damn. This is what happens when you have technology. I mean, back in the old days, you'd use like a camcorder or something, and it wouldn't lag. It was just, that's the way it was. It worked. While I'm on that subject, 50 years ago, 1 gallon milk containers were better designed than they are now. Especially that thing on the top, you got to pull the thing off the top. You open a new gallon of milk. There's like that little circular thing on top of the plastic hole. Half the time it doesn't come off. You got to like cut it with a knife to get the thing off. Worked better 50 years ago. So let's see here. Yeah, I mean, how can we evaluate or reconcile these different worldviews? Well, the unmoved mover, I don't think that's really a good theory. You like the actus purus. So long as you want to reify the absolute, then that kind of works. And dependent co-arising doesn't even apply to the absolute. That's just how samsara works, how the illusion works. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Philalethes. And Philalethes says, in this video, you implied that being too connected, he's referring to the previous Q&A video. In the previous Q&A video, you implied that being too connected to the internet destroys Dhamma practice. Well, kind of. What other such concrete advice do you have for becoming Dhamma-oriented as a lay Westerner? Well, I mean, I didn't specifically like single out the internet as destroying Dhamma practice. I was just saying simplify. That the more complexity you've got in your world, the more your mind is going to be like diffused to deal with all these different complications. Whereas if you reduce the number of complications, you simplify your life, then you've got more mental capital to deal with these things in a more wholehearted or single-minded manner. So it's not just the internet. I mean, it's anything. I mean, you want to like really practice Dhamma as a layperson, then you're better off just getting like a small apartment, not a lot of stuff in that apartment, or a cabin out in the woods would be even better, and just live a simple life. That would be the best way to do it, or a good way of doing it anyhow. I mean, different people are different. Different people have like different tolerances of complexity, as you know, whether it's going to just completely distract them so that they have no depth left. But there is a reason why, like, the great philosophers are generally people that don't have to work for a living. You know, they're like independently wealthy people. Just traditionally, you look at all the great philosophers, most of them, I mean, a few of them might be college professors, but most of them were just independently wealthy, did not have to work for a living, and so they could just sit around. And this is back before internet and all that. And so, you know, they're just sitting alone in a room full of books and some paper and pens and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's just too much complication is really going to just diffuse out your mental energy. And if you want it like stronger and more centered, more focused, you've got to reduce the distractions. And the best way of doing that is just live a very Spartan, simple existence. So let's see here. Yeah, I guess that's, I just pretty much repeated the same thing I said last time. Let's see. Okay, I'm just going to move on to Phil Lathy's second question. What is your own favorite episode of all the Q&As I have done? Well, I mean, this is the 158th Q&A, and they all just kind of blend together. I mean, I really don't have a memorable one. I mean, I kind of remember one, it was around Christmas time a few years ago when we had two whippets, kind of a cream colored one plus the spotted one we've got now. That I just had like a good vibe to it with a Christmas tree behind me and stuff. It was just sort of a cozy, sort of happy vibe going in that one. But I mean, I guess my favorite episode would be the one where I was most sort of channeling. And I do that sometimes. Sometimes I'm surprised by my own answers because I haven't really thought out in advance what I'm going to say. So sometimes I'll just sort of get into this mode where I'm just kind of like almost channeling information. And so that kind of episode is generally my favorite, the most satisfying to me. But there's been more than one, and I can't really single out like one in particular. And so I'm just going to move on to Phil Lathy's third question. That's what I'm going to do. And his third question is, if you had to, how would you convince someone who is considering becoming a Zen monk to choose Theravada or EBT? I assume that means early Buddhist texts. It's not like food stamps or something. Instead of, if he does not care for isolating the original words of the Buddha, assume you had to do it solely on the basis of philosophy. Solely on the basis of philosophy. Well, this is sort of like that Hindu question above. Like if I have to convince a Hindu that the Atman is not like absolute and eternal, I mean, as a general rule, I wouldn't bother. And in this case, I mean, if someone really has their heart set on becoming a Zen monk, I don't think I'd even want to talk them out of it, which is probably why Phil Atheist starts with the words, if you had to. So let's say somebody's pointing a gun at my sweetheart saying, if you don't persuade this person who wants to become a Zen monk to become a Theravada bhikkhu instead, then she's going to get it. Well, gosh, I mean, it's just kind of like being a nosy Karen sort of person to try and talk a person out of this, especially if, I mean, one of the implications that Philalethes throws at me is that this person doesn't even care about what the Buddha actually taught. So, I mean, if he doesn't even care what the Buddha really taught, he might be better off as a Zen monk. But again, you've got the psycho pointing a gun. So, solely on the basis of philosophy, well, I might start off just by pointing out that a lot of Pure Land stuff has infiltrated Zen Buddhism. So I might emphasize the silliness of Pure Land Buddhism, just for starters, see if I strike any traction with that. So maybe he doesn't care about Pure Land Buddhism either. He doesn't care if what he's following was really taught by the historical Gautama Buddha or not. Then, I mean, what do you say to this kind of person if they're like considering themselves to be a Buddhist? Really, I mean, just if you take the Pure Land stuff out of Zen and some of the other Mahayana like mythology stuff out of Zen, it's really a pretty good system. It's my second choice after Theravada. I originally was planning on becoming a Zen monk up until I realized that Theravada came closer to what the Buddha originally taught, but this hypothetical person doesn't give a shit if the Buddha originally taught it or not. So this is a tough question. Just solely on the basis of philosophy, that I think Zen in some respects might even be better. Just because, well, first of all, really early Buddhism didn't really have a philosophy. So, I mean, it was sort of like the Atthakavagga is just telling you to stay away from philosophy. A monk does not, the holy man does not go by philosophies. So, but then Theravada just kind of ignored this sort of thing or just redefined it. So then they started cooking up this elaborate Abhidhamma philosophy, which is, in my opinion, inferior to the iconoclasm of Zen. So I'm really in a bind here. How do I talk somebody into preferring Theravada over Zen if they don't even care what the Buddha really taught? So yeah, I might start, my first attempt would be just to point out like a lot of Pure Land elements that have gotten into Zen. That like it might be, for all I know, that most Zen isn't like what you read in the texts, like the Blue Cliff records or the Mumon Khan. You've got these enigmatic monks standing around wearing black, probably talking in riddles and hitting each other with sticks. It's a real Zen monastery doesn't really resemble that very much, at least not the real Zen monastery that I spent some time at before I decided on becoming a Theravada monk. So, yeah, I mean, the basis of philosophy, trying to show the sort of the logical flaws in the bodhisattva concept. So that might be my second attempt after kind of feeling out the person on the Pure Land elements that have infiltrated Zen Buddhism. Then I might start talking about the bodhisattva concept. How it's clearly a bad idea to postpone your own enlightenment indefinitely until all other beings are saved, because all other beings aren't going to be saved. I mean, samsara has been around for an infinite length of time already, and there's still an infinite number of suffering beings, which is a pretty good indication that there's always going to be an infinite number of suffering beings in this illusion that isn't even real. There's always going to be an infinite number of statues in the uncarved block of marble in a virtual state or conditional state. So that might be my second angle, just to see if I strike any traction with that. And then if not, then I just have to kind of feel him out. I'd have to question him about his own philosophical views and so forth. And maybe just try and point out that like early Buddhism, like the Atthakavagga, is superior to that. The name that can't be named is not the eternal name. Zen has a reputation for adopting that attitude. But the Atthakavagga, which is early Buddhist text, very early Buddhist text, it's VEBT, not just EBT. That's sort of like the OG of that whole point of view. So the best of what is in Zen is already existent in Theravada or early Pali texts. So I could use that angle also, I suppose, but that would not be a philosophical argument. I just hope my sweetie doesn't get shot, because this situation is really a problematic one. And I'm just going to move on to the next question, I guess. Just let him be a Zen monk. That's... I'll just try and rescue my woman. Just wrestle the gun out of his hands or something, and just let the guy be a Zen monk for all I care. So the next question is from the proto-pseudo-monk. And the proto-pseudo-monk has dispensed with headings for his questions in this particular episode, but he has still persisted in essay questions. So, the proto-pseudo-monk's first question is, you say there are no guarantees for enlightenment in Buddhism. What about in that sutta, Satipatthana, I think? Doesn't it say that if one practices diligently, one is guaranteed enlightenment? And then he has the quote here, let alone 7 years, 1 year, 7 months, half a month, if practiced in this way for 7 days, 1 or 2 fruits may be expected, either arahantship here and now, or the state of non-returning. I interpret that as an exclusive or enlightenment. Because nibbana doesn't have a cause and there are no guarantees, then why follow the strict, austere Theravada path and not follow the tantric path instead? I don't understand your heretical interpretation of attaining nibbana as through the grace of God. It's a bit discouraging. Well, becoming a non-returner in this sutta, in the Satipatthana Sutta, also the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, being a non-returner is not the same as enlightenment. It's just like you're either going to become enlightened or you're going to become very close to enlightenment. So, it reminds me of what J. Krishnamurti used to say, where, you can open the window, but you can't cause the breeze to blow in. It's sort of like becoming enlightened. The breeze blowing in would be like liberating insight or something, or, it's essentially enlightenment. But obviously, the breeze isn't going to blow in if the window isn't open. So at least you have to make yourself receptive or prepare yourself for enlightenment, even though you can't make yourself be enlightened, because that's just more karma. Karma leads to more karma. The enlightenment cannot be the cause of, it cannot be the effect of a cause, because then it would be impermanent and conducive to suffering. So, it is a paradox. And when you get to the absolute, it's always going to be paradoxical. Infinity is, paradox is always lurking in the shadows whenever you start dealing with infinity. So, this question here, why follow the strict austere Theravada path and not follow the tantric path instead? Well, the strict austere Theravada path may be more conducive to getting that window open and making yourself receptive to the possibility of enlightenment. Like the tantric path, you might just be making more and more bad karma for yourself, just muddying your own waters, so to speak, making complications for yourself by thinking that you're being tantric when really you're just wallowing in samsara. Self-deception, I am sure, is very common among tantric practitioners. Whereas in the strict austere Theravada path, still you can delude yourself. You can just have this egoistic pride in how shabby you are, that kind of thing. There's always stumbling blocks and obstructions and so forth, mainly self-imposed. But it seems like the strict austere Theravada path is just more straightforward in getting that window open than the tantric path, for example. You can't make the wind blow in, but at least you can open the window. And it's not going to blow in unless that window is open. So following Satipatthana strictly for 7 days or more, I mean, that opens the window. But it cannot cause the wind to blow in, or the breeze to blow in. And it's like this paradox. Mahayana Buddhists play up the paradox, just because they like to play up the idea that you can't really understand the highest truth by thinking about it. In Theravada, they sort of at first just ignored the problem. It's just more problems that are just going to cause more just wallowing in like cerebral samsara. And then they just kind of backed away from it, even though I don't think Theravada, it has to admit that you can't just force yourself to become enlightened. You cannot make yourself be enlightened. But as a general rule, in traditional Orthodox Theravada, they just kind of sidestep that particular issue. It still happens, and so they couldn't really think of a good intellectual, like, plausible explanation for it, so they probably wisely just left it alone. And I guess I'll just move on to the next question here. Also from the proto-pseudo-monk who used to call himself Cool Whip. He says, I find myself in a paradox. I am seeking conditions with the hope of seeking the unconditioned. Can you please advise how must one work with conditions, i.e. the wise relationship to them, while pursuing nibbana? How is the paradox resolved? We inhabit this conditional reality. Monkhood with the support of lay people is the closest exception to independence from conditions. The rest of us must navigate this messy conventional reality. I have about 2 years left till I can even begin the ordination process, samanera, novice, etc. Until then, careful consideration of conditions must be made. Seeing nibbana in this state seems impossible. For instance, if I saw the unconditioned now, my karma is such that I still couldn't escape my conditions unless I died. Mindfulness isn't enough to escape the paradox. Like, imagine you became fully enlightened as a layperson with no monasteries nearby. Suddenly you would need money to buy a flight and get a visa to find a more suitable form. Many subsequent moments after attaining nibbana, the unconditioned still needs conditions to continue in the unconditioned. Nibbana has no place in conditioned lay life. Well, they're not mutually exclusive. Like reality and illusion, nibbana and samsara. And again, the Mahayana Buddhists play this up. They talk about it a lot more than the Theravadins do. The Theravadins just think they're just qualitatively different. That samsara and nibbana are just qualitatively different, even though, strangely, the Abhidhamma scholars place them at the same level of reality. But it's like the uncarved block of stone is always there, so long as you're dealing with these virtual statues that are inside the uncarved block of stone. So nirvana and samsara are simultaneous. They occur, and if you can say that nirvana occurs, the same place, the same time, simultaneous. So it's just a matter of like perspective. An enlightened person living on samsara, they look around, they see nirvana. I'm not exactly sure how to explain this, but the two are not mutually exclusive. Like, you're not eliminating conditions, you're just transcending them. Like, you start realizing the existence of the uncarved block of marble. That doesn't mean that every single possible statue, or just one statue of this person that's in question, just disappears, it stops existing. It's still going to be there. All possible statues are going to be inside that block of marble. And so once you stop identifying with those statues, that's fine. Still, it's like, it may be that the perceptions or karma of the people around you are going to kind of help to maintain that physical body that you used to identify with. Man, there's some tough questions here. Or maybe it's just my mental state and my perspiry, muggy South Carolina summer state that's making answering questions a little more difficult tonight. So, yeah, I mean, the conditioned and the unconditioned, they're not mutually exclusive, and they're both simultaneous. And it's just a matter of your perspective. Let's see here. How is the paradox resolved? No, there's no resolution. Let's see. I mean, you can live in a cell, which simplifies samsara, makes it easier not to be distracted by it. I mean, it makes it easier to see through it. But once you're fully enlightened, you're going to see through it. I mean, there's no falling back. That was one of the first arguments. I think some of the Mahayana chroniclers actually had the Second Council be based on this argument rather than on Vinaya matters, like the Theravadins say, is that there were some philosophers who were saying that you could be, after you become enlightened, you can like backslide and become unenlightened again. Theravadins say no. And some of the earliest texts, one who has become such does not fall back. That's like in the Atthakavagga. So, I mean, once you've become fully enlightened, then it's like Zen in the marketplace, and there's no worries. I mean, there's no problem. So, golly. Yeah, I think largely this is a sort of an artificial problem. But I mean, there's always going to be a paradox, so long as you're using a perceiving mind trying to deal with infinity, and infinity cannot be perceived. You can have this idea of infinity, but that idea will not itself be infinite. Except for like in the Blakean sense of infinity in a grain of sand or whatever. Eternity in an hour. Yeah, the hopes of seeking the unconditioned. I mean, you're wallowing in. I mean, you're pervaded by the unconditioned at this very moment. How far away is the unconditioned? The unconditioned is right here, right now, always. So we inhabit this unconditioned. We inhabit this conditioned reality, which isn't ultimately real. Let's see. Monkhood with the support of lay people is the closest exception to independence from conditions. Well, maybe. I mean, like being in a sensory deprivation booth of some sort might come a little closer. Prison cell even, maybe. The rest of us must navigate this messy conventional reality. Yeah, well, I mean, even for monks, samsara is still samsara. Let's see. Let's see, I saw the unconditioned now. My karma is such that I still couldn't escape my conditions unless I died. Well, you don't know that. I mean, if you saw the unconditioned to the point of becoming enlightened, then, I mean, you could be in the middle of a carnival. You could be on a roller coaster ride or something, and still, I mean, it wouldn't make you any less enlightened. So, like imagine you become fully enlightened as a layperson with no monasteries nearby. Suddenly you would need money to buy a flight and get a visa to find a more suitable form. Not necessarily at all. I mean, according to Theravada, Orthodox Theravada, if you become enlightened and you're not a monk yet, you've got like 24 to 48 hours to be ordained or you're going to die. But I personally doubt it. I do not personally think that you absolutely have to be some kind of monastic renunciant after you are enlightened. It might help you to become enlightened, but after you become enlightened, it's largely irrelevant, it seems to me. I mean, the purpose of becoming a monk is to become enlightened, not to maintain enlightenment somehow. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Yuga-U. And Yuga-U says, and we're still lagging, which is not good. Yuga-U says, I have read the first two books from the Book of the New Sun. I don't get it. What makes it that special in your mind? Well, I mean, the Book of the New Sun, I do consider it to be one of the greatest literary fictional works in American literature. And partly it's because of the scope of it. I mean, he deals with like just about the entire human condition. Like there have been statements for over 100 years, I'm sure, that Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, just all questions concerning the human condition are contained in that one book. But I think the Book of the New Sun even has a greater scope than like the Brothers Karamazov or even Moby Dick. That it's just all over, it's just everything. And also, I mean, it's just the whole setting of it is the earth is dying. I mean, this is hundreds of millions of years in the future. After the human race has colonized thousands of other worlds and the earth itself is just sort of burned out. It's like the center of human like civilization or whatever is now not even on the earth anymore. It's just humanity has largely left it behind, partly just because it's run out of resources and so forth. So I mean, just sort of a contemplation of the death of the earth, the dying of the world is also a kind of profound element of the story. But it's a very complicated story, and it's some things that happen at the end are like foreshadowed towards the beginning, like the weird dream that Severian has when he's sleeping on the bed with what's his name? Gosh, can't remember his name now. The giant scientist, the giant sociopathic scientist. So let's see here. And it's just well written. That's another aspect of it. But it was just sort of such a tour de force with regard to the imagination. It's just this whole different world that is taking place. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just like a really good exercise of imagination. It's good writing, and it's dealing with all these different ideas that, I don't know, it just makes it like practically scripture, in my opinion. I think that the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe has more profundity in it certainly than the Old Testament or the Quran for that matter. So let's see here. I guess that's good enough. And so Yugu did ask 4 questions here, although one of the questions is so easily answered that I'll let it slide this time, and his name will just go on like a provisional list of possible additions to the actual list of people that ask too many questions. So Yugo's second question is, what is your opinion on Cervantes' Don Quixote? And I did read Don Quixote in my 20s, and I read a lot of it while working on fishing boats, like in between hauls, and the whole boat is like rocking back and forth and it's messing up like your inner ear and everything. And so I'm not sure how deeply it sunk in when I read Don Quixote. I like Don Quixote. I mean, the character, I really, you can't help but kind of feel sorry for him, sympathize with him. I mean, some of it's awful. Like there was that story that's told. I don't even remember who tells the story, but I do remember in Don Quixote, there's this one story of this man who has this beautiful wife who adores him and is completely faithful to him, but then he decides he's going to test her. And so he pays some friend of his to just do his utmost to seduce this guy's wife, his own wife. And she's resisting and resisting and resisting, but of course she's human. So finally, after lots and lots of effort, paid for by her own husband, his friend finally succeeds in seducing her. And then it's like the hammer comes down on her, and I don't remember if he kills her or what, but I mean, it's really just a stupid, awful story. But what do you expect from like late Renaissance Spain? I'm not exactly sure when Don Quixote was written. I assume it'd be like 16th or 17th century Spain. So, yeah, I mean, Don Quixote, he was like Dostoevsky read about Don Quixote. It's like when Dostoevsky wrote his novel The Idiot, he really wanted to portray like a genuinely Christ-like good person. And in one of his letters that I read an excerpt from, he's talking about how there's really not much of that you can find in Western fiction. Like Don Quixote, it was one of the best examples of a good person, although at the same time he was like delusional. You know, he was just sort of kind of got unhinged from reading too many like books on chivalry, you know, romantic novels about chivalry and so forth. And also another example that Dostoevsky gives is Pickwick and the Pickwick Papers, which is sort of a, what do you call it, episodic sort of novel, picaresque novel by Charles Dickens. So, I mean, Don Quixote is definitely a sympathetic character. You feel sorry for him. And he's got a lot of goodness in him. But I really don't have much of an opinion on him, partly because I read the novel a very long time ago, never watched any movie versions to refresh my memory. And I did read it while working on a fishing boat where there was all these distractions and so forth going on. And I didn't really get very deep into the novel. And so I'm just going to move on to Yuga's third question, which could qualify as a transgressional question. But it's so short that I guess I'll let it slide this time. Have you read Erasmus Rotterdam in Praise of Folly? Opinion if yes. When I was taking a Western Civ class in college, I read excerpts from In Praise of Folly, and that was it. So, yeah, and I forget everything in it. I just remember that I read like excerpts from it. So, yeah, I have read part of it, and I've forgotten what I read, and so I have no opinion on the matter. And this is sort of the one of 4 questions anyway, so I'm just moving on to Yuga-U's 4th question. He says, I'm deeply sorry about this transgression, but lately I wake up in the middle of the night filled with fear and dread about dying. I note it and go back to sleep. My question is, why is that happening? Well, I mean, this is all I know about the situation. So exactly why that is happening, I mean, what events are going on in your life that might be causing this to happen, I have no clue. I mean, the fear and dread about dying, that's just animal instinct. So there's something that's causing you to feel, you know, like insecure about your own security, so that, you know, something is, you know, is somehow you have this feeling that something big can happen that you are sort of at a subconscious level are equating with death. And then it's like the animal instinct, animal survival instinct kicks in, and there's this fear and dread about it. But what that actually is happening, I mean, I have no clue, because this is all I know about the situation. So you wake up in the middle of the night filled with fear and dread about dying. Well, that's just animal instinct right there. And whether it's actual literal dying or just some kind of major change, you know, like in the tarot deck, tarot cards, the death card really isn't as bad of a card as people think it is. I mean, it's nowhere near the worst card. It's like the Tower, I think, is the worst card in the deck, not the death card. Death card just means some sort of major change, like the major ending of something. So even that can inspire some kind of insecurity, which can then cause you to jerk awake in the middle of the night with fear and dread. But the actual fear and dread it's like an animal survival instinct. Because we humans are animals. But, I mean, the actual causes, I mean, I have no clue. So I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's next question. No, this is Xenothoid's first question. Excuse me. Now I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's first question. How do Buddhist funerals work? I heard Ajahn Punadamo mention that in Buddhist funeral services, there is more focus on reminding the living that they will die too someday, as opposed to simple mourning. Can you elaborate on this? Yeah, like a Buddhist funeral doesn't work the way a Christian funeral does. A Christian funeral is, you've got the person embalmed, wearing like a suit in an open casket. They look better than they did when they were alive. And then you have people giving eulogies, which a lot of the time is just very one-sided, not particularly realistic accounts of what this person was like, about what a wonderful, glorious person they were, whether they really were that way or not. I mean, really, if you're, somebody close to you dies, you love them, you're going to remember the best stuff and not talk about anything but the best stuff. It makes kind of sense, I guess. But in a Buddhist funeral, I've only attended 2 that I can remember. No, wait, 3. 2 were for monks, and 1 was for some Chinese, Burmese person in America that I didn't know. The monks got invited to attend this funeral, so I went. But my teacher, Pakoku Seattle, and also my friend Unandia, I attended their funerals and cremations. And really, it's the monks who are there. One monk in particular will give a sermon on impermanence. It's all impermanent. And then, like, if you got more than that, you have monks that might be chanting about impermanence or just chanting protection chants, that kind of thing. And often there's like a cremation afterwards. And it was kind of surprising to me that a lot of people would leave before the cremation even starts. It seems like that would be like one of the main things of the funeral is the cremation. But a lot of people just don't want to see that kind of thing. They just make offerings to the monks and, pay their last respects, because they are human. I mean, they're not just completely Buddhist and just, it's all impermanent and I'm going to die too someday. It's like, they want to say goodbye to their friend or, this venerable monk or whatever, pay their respects one last time in his presence, or at least in the presence of his physical body. But yeah, the whole theme of a Buddhist funeral is impermanence. It happens to all of us. It's his turn this time. Who knows whose turn it's going to be next? Just keep that in mind, because that's one of the great protectors. So, let's see. Did I answer the question? Can I elaborate? Yeah, I did elaborate a little bit. Yeah, you don't have eulogies, really. It's just the monk gives a speech, or whoever does this, mainly just on Buddhist impermanence, or the Buddhist idea of impermanence. And the monks will be chanting certain verses about impermanence. There's enough monks together to do that. And then you have the cremation, and then everybody goes home. So, yeah, I think I elaborated. So I'm going to move on to Xenothoid's next question. Did you go to Ajahn Chah's funeral? I've heard that somewhere around 1 million people attended. Now, I didn't hear about Ajahn Chah dying. I was probably in Burma at the time, and Burmese Buddhist lay people generally are not keeping track of what's going on with Thai Ajahns. A lot of Burmese lay people just think Thailand is Mahayana Buddhist. They have no clue. So yeah, I did not go to Ajahn Chah's funeral. So let's just move on to Rui here. Did you keep a Buddha Rupa during your anchorite Burma days? And the only Buddha statue I owned when I was a monk is right up there on the. I can't really. Let's see if I can do this. All right? No, this is not easy because of the lag. I think it's right around here, right there. That little statue. It was, I was living in a cave in Burma, and some layperson offered it to me. I went into the village for alms one day, and somebody just handed me this little marble statue, and it's in the Jhana Mudra, which is my favorite Buddha mudra. It's like the hand positions. Different Buddhas will have different positions. In Theravada, there are 4 main mudras that are symbolic of four of the most important moments in the Buddha's life. The jhana mudra, where his hand is like this, he's just like sitting in meditation. His jhana means meditation. He's in meditation pose, and that's symbolic of like the night of his enlightenment. And then you've got the Bhumipasa mudra, which is the most common mudra in Burma, which is ironic, where he's got one hand in his lap like this, and the other hand is reaching down and touching the earth. And technically speaking, he wasn't even the Buddha yet. That was the eve of his enlightenment, where Mara is challenging his right to sit there, and he calls upon the earth as his witness that he has the right to sit there under that Bodhi tree, and he wasn't even enlightened yet, which is weird that would be the mudra that is favored in Burma. Then you've got the mudra where the Buddha is going like this, which is not so common, partly just because I assume it's hard to carve, and that's symbolic of the Buddha giving his first sermon. He's counting off on his fingers the Four Noble Truths. And then you've got the parinirvana mudra, where he's lying on his right side. When you see the Buddha lying down on his right side, full length, with his toes all lined up, then that is symbolic of his death. That's the parinirvana mudra. So that's dying Buddha there. But yeah, this one little marble statue that is on the bookshelf right behind me, I got that when I was living in a cave in Burma, and I just walked for alms one day, and somebody handed it to me, but because it was in the jhana mudra. They knew that I liked the jhana mudra. I mentioned to lay people that's my favorite posture or hand position for a Buddha statue. I really didn't like the Bhumipasa where he's touching the ground, because he's not even the Buddha yet. So, yeah, that was the only time I got a Buddha statue, when I was a monk. Oh, wait. No, actually, I had another one very briefly, but I got rid of it. It was just a tiny little one like this, carved out of some kind of stone. But for the most part, I didn't ask for the first one, the main one that I had. It was just given to me, which is fine, and I still have it. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Robert. Robert says, do you have any opinions on George Berkeley and his idealist philosophy, or rather his immaterialist philosophy? I think that's what he called it. George Berkeley. Well, George Berkeley, I've discussed all of this before in previous videos, that George Berkeley pretty much just shot his entire wad on this one philosophical point, that you cannot really know or prove the existence of physical matter. That was his contribution to Western philosophy, this one idea that he just hammered away at. So, I agree with that. You cannot prove the existence of physical matter. You can infer it. It's definitely a very convenient working hypothesis, but he had his influence on the French philosopher Malebranche, who had his influence on David Hume, who was skeptical of the existence of physical matter, who then influenced Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant said that reading Hume is what awoke him from his dogmatic slumbers. And then Immanuel Kant inspired the entire German idealist philosophical movement with Hegel and so forth, and Schopenhauer, who just dismissed the idea of physical matter. So he definitely had a significant effect on Buddhist or on Western philosophy. But when you get into how he describes how it works, how all that exists are minds and perceptions, and then you've got this one central mind that is coordinating the perceptions of all the other minds, and that central mind is God. So that when you see an apple on the table, you're not really seeing a physical apple on a physical table. It's just that God is implanting into your mind the semblance of an apple on a table. It's like he's coordinating all of everybody's dreams to be harmonious with each other. So that we can all seemingly be interacting in this one objective universe, when really it's just God is implanting these perceptions in everybody's mind as though they're participating in this physical phenomenal universe. And I really don't believe that. I can't prove that he's wrong, but I rather doubt that you've got this central scrutinizing mind that is coordinating the perceptions of everybody else. So, I do bring up Berkeley a lot, though, just because there are a lot of people who just assume that physical matter obviously exists. You know, they just accept it. You know, that's just the way it is. They think that they know that it physically exists. I mean, most people do. Dogs and chickens are the same. They just assume physical matter exists. So George Berkeley was good for challenging that one point of view. And he's got 2 books on it. One is The Three Dialogues, and I can't remember what the other one is. But they're worth reading if you really want to get into that. And so I'm just going to move on to Robert's second question. He says, based on a question in previous Q&A, he says, by gladdening the mind, I meant becoming satisfied with how things are right now. Then when a thought of craving or clinging arises, one drops it and returns to being satisfied right now and sustaining the state of satisfaction, right effort. And if piti arises, enjoy the piti. And I think we're not lagging right now. That's nice. Joy is good and equanimity is also good. The idea is just that we are not victims of the world. We can be okay with how things are, i.e., everything is already okay, nothing to fix, nowhere to go. By everything is okay, I don't mean dukkha denial. It's saying as things are right now, I cannot fix the world. Things are already okay as they are. We can be safe, secure, and comfortable right now. Nothing has to change in the world in order for me to be satisfied. I can already be satisfied. Given this, do you still think it is not Dhamma practice as outlined in early Buddhism? I think the emphasis would be somewhat different. Again, joy is good and equanimity is also good. But, I mean, ultimately, equanimity isn't good. Equanimity is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. And that's really what, like, the early Buddhist point of view is going for, is neutrality. Certainly not negativity, but not positivity either. I mean, because positive joy has an opposite. I mean, it's all going to balance out in the long run. I mean, that's not the Buddhist explanation for it. That's more of a Taoist explanation. But that's the way it is, really. I mean, you can't just have a coin with one side. You can't have a coin with one side being heads and no other side. You have positive, you're going to have negative. It's the closest Orthodox Theravada comes to that idea is the Loka Dhamma. You know, the ways of the world where there's these pairs of opposites that are always going to be balancing out. So if piti arises, enjoy the piti. Now, if piti arises, you just accept that. Be mindful of it. Do not wallow in it. Do not get attached to it. Because when you enjoy things, that is conducive to being attached to those things and wanting more of them and being unhappy when they don't happen and so on and so forth. But I am glad that finally, after over an hour and a half, we're not lagging anymore. See here. So it's like everything is already, it's really not Buddhist language here. I mean, it's very similar. I think there are some slight differences in like emphasis. And also you do not want to be accentuating the positive. Whatever occurs, accept it with mindfulness and as neutral of a mindfulness as you can manage. But again, you should be able to accept whatever happens. So it's there's a lot of this in the text. I mean, if you don't have any food, you're okay with that. If you're just sweltering hot, drenched in sweat, you're okay with that. If you're freezing cold and shivering, you're okay with that. If you're sick, you're okay with that. You accept whatever it is. You're not fighting against the way things are. I mean, that's dukkha. Not accepting the way things are is dukkha. And you don't want dukkha. I mean, you don't necessarily want to be overjoyed either. But just being okay with whatever happens, yeah, that's definitely like early Buddhist yoga. I mean, that's one reason why monks would be wandering alone out in forests and so forth. Just expose themselves to all this stuff that most people can't tolerate, but they learn to be okay with it. In order to be okay with anything, whatever life throws at you, you accept it with equanimity. So, yeah, I mean, to that extent, this explanation of Dhamma given by Robert would be fine. It's just any kind of positivity. I mean, you don't want positivity any more than you want negativity. You want neutrality. So, I mean, everything's fine. You can just accept it. I mean, that's okay. But if you're like liking it, you know, you're like rejoicing in it, then you're like veering away from the middle path of neutrality. Okay, satisfied. It would depend on the actual meaning of satisfied or satisfaction. But satisfied, so long as, I mean, it's just you're okay with it. You know, no struggles, no resistance, no friction. That's good. But if it becomes like a positive attraction, it's not good. Or like satisfied in the sense of just this glow of like well-being. So long as it's positive and not neutral, then you've veered off the middle path of like neutral acceptance. Which is one reason why in Theravada Buddhism, of the 4 Brahma Viharas, which is metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha, only upekkha or equanimity can get you to 4th jhana, which traditionally, at least in some traditions in early Theravada, was like the jumping off point to enlightenment. So, all right, I'm just going to move on to Robert's next question, which is, your metaphysical views have been hard for me to place. You reference the brain in regards to human action as well as evolution. However, ultimately, samsaric reality is an illusion. Yeah. Belief in certain things like rebirth and karma requires at least some basic metaphysics. However, it seems as though you don't want to make any definite claims about reality, as ultimate reality is beyond words and the intellect generally. Do you think you could maybe give a rough summary of your metaphysical views and how they tie in together? Gosh. Oh, I'm lagging again. Damn, at least we were not lagging for a few minutes. At the end of my cave journal, gosh, I forgot all about this. Just a minute. How you doing? How you guys doing? Where is it? Right here. Ugh. Oop. Donald Trump fell to the floor. I remember when I was living in a cave, I was keeping a journal, and I'd never done it before, but I just wrote down like a synopsis of my metaphysical views, just as a way of filling in the last pages before moving on to the next volume of the journal. And unfortunately, let's see. Just bear with me here. Yeah. Well, never mind. I won't try and find it because it would involve me trying to make sense out of this journal that was soaking in a flood for it was like at least 24 hours, and the ink is all smeared and everything. And this dog wants to say hello. So there she is. She's saying hello. And come on, wave. There you go. Yeah, she's a good dog. She's a sociopath, but still good. Okay. There's another one, but I won't lift her up because she's too heavy. So let's see here. Oh, after that 5-minute, what do you call it? 5-minute red herring, wild goose chase. I suppose I should try to give a rough summary of my metaphysical views. Well, I mean, ultimately, you've got, the uncarved block of marble. I mean, I've talked about that all the time. The uncarved block is like the absolute, the Tao, whatever you want to call that. But you don't want to reify it. I mean, you kind of specify that this is just a convenient way of talking. But I mean, it's mysticism, essentially mysticism, that you want to know reality. You have to penetrate through perception. You have to transcend or penetrate perception in order to understand the highest truth, which you can say is eternal and unchanging, infinite, infinite formless consciousness, or whatever you want to say, although it's all going to fall short. And then the rest of it, the phenomenal universe, is caused by dependent co-arising, which cause an infinite number of virtual statues to appear real. But, I mean, which would include like evolution and brains and DNA and all this. I mean, that is part of our reality. I'm sure that there are an infinite number of other versions of samsara that have no evolution, no DNA, that kind of thing. No brains. So, golly. I mean, I'm talking about my metaphysical views all the time. And if Robert is having a difficulty in pinpointing what kind of label to give to my metaphysical views, then maybe that's a good thing. Because like in the Atthakavagga, I mean, you shouldn't be having philosophical views anyway. You certainly shouldn't be attaching to them. You shouldn't be identifying with them, anything like that. You shouldn't be emotionally invested in them. But, golly, I mean, I'm certainly not a materialist, so you got that. I am a mystic. I do consider rationalism to be a good approach within the context of samsara, but it's not going to get you beyond samsara unless you use it in this ruthless, like, self-attacking mode like Majjhimaka does, which just destroys itself, really, leaving emptiness behind. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I really don't bother trying to categorize my own point of view, other than not a materialist and certainly more mystical than rationalistic. I mean, empiricism is like the best approach to take within the realm of illusion, the samsaric phenomenal world. Empiricism is about your best bet for navigating samsara, which includes rationality. But I mean, you want to start with empiricism and add rationality to that, rather than start with rationality and then try to build an entire worldview just from like logical axioms or something. But it's, I mean, how you want to categorize that is up to you. And really, you shouldn't really be too much invested in this sort of thing anyway. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. And that's probably not a satisfying answer that I just gave, but it may be that any truthful answer would not be particularly satisfying. Mainly because I don't even categorize my own point of view. I mean, I used to consider myself a monist, so I guess there's that. certainly mystic with regard to understanding reality, and an empiricist with regard to navigating samsara, with some Buddhist dogma thrown in. So I'm a Buddhist too. So let's just move on to Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Liber Lamb. And his question is, could you point out some tendencies you see in New Age spirituality and occultism where people reify the ultimate and get sidetracked by Mara? Well, first of all, there's a certain ambiguity here with regard to New Age spirituality and occultism. Is that New Age spirituality and New Age occultism, or is that New Age spirituality, and occultism as two entirely separate things, with the occultism not being New Age occultism? So that is kind of an ambiguity that is difficult for me to navigate. But could I point out some tendencies I see in New Age spirituality and occultism where people reify the ultimate and get sidetracked by Mara? Well, with regard to New Age, my dealings with New Age people was sort of like, I mean, they're kind of like hippies. And I mean, they're not reifying the ultimate for the most part. You know, they might have this vague or, you know, kind of like this Hindu-y kind of idea of, you know, God as the ultimate, whatever they're going to define God as. But it's going to be just an idea, so that's being sidetracked by Mara. Occultism, yeah, I think the occultists are much more inclined than the spiritual, like the New Age people, to really reify the ultimate, because most of the New Age people are really, they don't even get as far as reifying the ultimate, other than just calling it God or whatever, and then just not thinking about it much, because they're mostly like dealing at an emotional level, you know, sort of a feminine, stereotypically feminine, heart-based kind of level. And stuff like reifying the ultimate is more of a head thing than a heart thing. But with regard to like occultism, you know, like Aleister Crowley or something like that, I'm really not that familiar with Western occultism. Some of the people I know are much more conversant with regard to occultism than I am. I never read a single book by Aleister Crowley. Somebody sent me one, but I never got around to reading it. And like I said a long time ago, I saw a book by Crowley in a bookstore once and very briefly considered buying it. And then I just kind of chickened out with the idea that Crowley was such a person that he might have just like put a blanket curse on anybody who read the book. Who knows? So, yeah, occultism for the most part is not really an enlightened system, or, I mean, in general. I mean, it's certainly not just one system. But occultism in general is mainly samsara oriented. And, I mean, that is certainly being sidetracked by Mara. That's entirely within the realm of Mara. I don't know. I assume there's occultists who are trying to transcend samsara in a more or less Buddhistic sense. But I really don't know enough about it to know which particular schools of occultism are more spiritually advanced to the point of actually trying to transcend samsara, not just master samsara, you know, in a kind of a Nietzschean sense. You know, not just trying to manipulate samsara through magic or whatever, but actually just trying to bail out of the system, trying to transcend it. Not just rise above it as some kind of super archon or something, but just completely transcend it as an illusion to be transcended. I'm really not familiar with any so-called occultism that goes that far. My understanding of occultism is more like methods of manipulating samsara and gaining mastery of samsara so that you can like become some higher power within the context of samsara, which is entirely Mara's realm. And I don't know to what extent they reify the ultimate, if they even bother. I mean, they might not even get to the ultimate. I assume a lot of occultist schools don't even have a concept of the ultimate. You know, they might just be completely like samsara oriented, where there's just like an infinite infinite number of levels, or maybe that you just reach this highest level and that's as high as you can go. I mean, there's no way out of samsara. I assume there's occultist schools that are like that. They don't even have a concept of the ultimate. You know, they might just say that there isn't one. So yeah, but with regard to New Age, I mean, it's pretty soft-headed as a system in general. I assume that there were like formulators, like New Age philosophers, you know, sort of like the formulators of like the beat movement, you know, like Kerouac and Ginsberg and J.F. Ryder, Gary Snyder. You know, they actually have a philosophy that they're applying this whole movement towards, that I assume there's that. I mean, I've even read that Evola is studied by some New Age people because of his sex magic and so forth. But it's, as a general rule, it's very this world oriented. That New Age is more of a lifestyle than any kind of spiritual movement. It seems to me, it's sort of like being like neo hippies. So, yeah, that's about my answer to that one. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Priapistic Monk, and he says, "What makes a monk?" And technically, what makes a monk is an ordination ceremony, a valid ordination ceremony into a monastic order. That's what makes a monk. That, like from a Burmese point of view, let's say you've got someone who lives like a monk, they look like a monk, they go for alms round, they wear brown robes and so forth, but they've never been ordained into the Buddhist Sangha, then they're not a monk, they're a yadait. They go by the name of a yadait. I knew a yadait once. And strangely, yadait is like the Burmese corruption of the word rishi, or what is corrupted into English as rishi. So technically, a monk would be a member of an ordained member of a monastic order, especially if they have taken higher orders and aren't just a novice. And they have to be male. But if you want to say that, so anyone who lives like a monastic life, they live like a monk, then they're like an unofficial monk. I mean, you could say that too, but technically, which is the easiest way to answer this question so that there's no, there's no ambiguity, then a monk is a man who has been validly ordained into a monastic order. Fully ordained. So it's Vinaya. I've read that what separates a monk from a lay people is Vinaya, or the rules of monastic discipline. And if you just want to just renounce the world and go eclectic or whatever, non-denominational, you don't get ordained, then, you can live like a monk, but you're not really a monk. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Fred. And Fred says, if one can't reach nibbana by works and jhana, what is the role of wisdom? Well, the role of wisdom is to make it easier to become enlightened, even though it can't make you be enlightened. It's like I was saying earlier, you can open the window, but you can't force the breeze to blow in. So wisdom is opening the window, maybe clearing away the rubbish, the dirbus from before you get to the window so you can even get to it. And some people might have to use like razor blades or screwdrivers, crowbars, because the window has been like painted shut for decades. Who knows how long. But going with just getting away from the whole window. It's like reality is always here. It's just that we are distracted by all these perceptions in our mind. So what wisdom does is it makes the perceptions more subtle and easier to stop believing that they're reality. It's like making, just reducing, I'm trying to decide which metaphor to go with. Or like, here's one that I've used before, that let's say consciousness is like water. And mental states, like perceptions and volitions, are like the waves and ripples on the surface of the water. And most people are completely in wave mode. They don't even have a concept of water. It's just this wave and that wave, and I like this wave and I hate that wave, and this wave is better than that wave, and those two waves are beautiful, and those waves over there are ugly, and just the whole world is just wave phenomena. And then they don't even have a concept of water. So what you do is, by making the waves less, like through meditation, more subtle, you don't have like choppy seas all the time. And when you have a flat calm, it's way easier to stop identifying reality with waves. So one of the main roles of wisdom, not the only role, but one of the main roles of wisdom at the highest level, is just to make the the samsaric world of perception more subtle through detaching from it, or through using like yogic techniques to just turn the waves into a flat calm so that you see water as water instead of as this wave versus that wave. But before you get to that level, wisdom is, causing you to choose good actions instead of evil actions, for example. Causes you to have a certain sensitivity so that you realize that by hurting another being, you're also hurting yourself. That kind of thing. So wisdom early on is driving morality and the search for more wisdom. Whereas at the highest level, wisdom is getting you as ready as you can be for full enlightenment. Perfection of wisdom would be enlightenment, where you're no longer identifying with wave phenomena. You're no longer considering wave phenomena to be the highest reality or the only reality. You're seeing through that. You're seeing through the veil. But you can't really reach Nibbana by works and jhana, by morality and meditation, sila and samadhi. But those are, in a way, prerequisites. Or it's just the more you do spiritual practice, the more likely it is, the more statistically likely it is that you're going to become enlightened. That doesn't mean that monks or even like seriously, conscientiously practicing monks and nuns are going to become enlightened. Still, the odds are very low for that, but still it's way higher than the average normie who's working a 40 or 50 hour job with bills to pay and a family to take care of and so forth, lawns to mow, all that stuff. So works and jhana, sila and samadhi, which leads to panya, all of those are just increasing the odds of you becoming enlightened, and also helping you to detach from samsara, to like rise above or transcend samsara to some degree. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Kundru. And Kundru says, I've seen the Buddha being referenced as the kinsman of the sun several times in the suttas. What does this name mean? And that is a good question. And it reminded me that in the Tuvaraka Sutta of the Atthakavagga, which is very old text, it begins, Puchami tam adicca bandhu. Those are the first words of the Tuvaraka Sutta of the Atthakavagga, which translates into English as, I ask that kinsman of the sun, or a relative of the sun, or a relative of adicca. And when I was a monk, you see it sometimes and you figure, well, it's some sort of mythological reference or just some honorific title that was given to people in ancient India that we've just lost the meaning of it. Like even some statements in Shakespeare, Shakespeare will make some reference to like current events that is just lost to us now. We have no idea what he's referring to. And it could be something like that in Pali with regard to the word adicca bandhu. Adicca is a word for the sun. It's not the usual word for the sun, but it's derived from Vedic Sanskrit. And bandhu just means like relative. So it may be that, or like a relative of the sun, the adicca bandhu, that adicca was like the name of some clan or some lineage that like I think in the commentaries it refers to gotras, which are like a clan that is bigger than just your family name. It's like a collection of family names. It's almost like a caste, a subcaste. Like Kondanya, I think, was one of the gotras in the Buddhist time, and adicca, according to this commentary, was another one of these gotras or clans or just lineages, familial lineages that spun off different, like family names like Gautama. So it was probably something along those lines. It's still controversial. I don't think that anyone really has nailed down some definitive explanation of it. In fact, I think there's one person recently who wrote a book who was trying to use kinsman of the sun or adicca bandhu as evidence that the Buddha himself was Persian and he was sort of, it was like an influence of Zoroastrianism that was more into sun worship than any of the systems in India. But I think I remember reading somewhere that there was like two main lineages, like the moon lineage and the sun lineage, and the Buddha was like of the sun lineage instead of the moon lineage with regard to his family, his like, what would you say, his ancestors. But still, I do not know exactly. It apparently was like some kind of lineage, like a family lineage, that he was called that, but I don't know for sure. And it could just be some honorific that was used in ancient India. Like, who knows, maybe if somebody did a search like in the Rig Veda, there might be, like the Vedic Sanskrit version of this same word that is found there, or some of the older like Vedic texts, like pre-Buddhist texts, or even like around the same time contemporaneous, like, proto-Hindu texts might have this same word that might give more insight into its actual meaning. But he is referred to as kinsman of the sun, or Aditya Bandhu. And I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. We're getting towards the end here. Next question is from Dhamma River. And I am sorry that I don't know for sure what Aditya Bandhu originally meant. You look it up in like the Pali English Dictionary, it just says kinsman of the sun with no more explanation than that. Aditya is the sun, Aditya Bandhu, kinsman of the sun, period. That's all the explanation that is given. And you can look it up on the internet and you're not going to find much. So listen, let's get back to Dhamma River here. Dhamma River says, what are your thoughts on the MAID program? And we are not lagging right now. We might have like 5 minutes of non-lagging in this whole fucking video. Dhamma River says, what are your thoughts on the MAID program in Canada from a moral and karmic perspective? It stands for medical assistance in dying. The government is helping people die. It's very controversial because it appears that people are getting this done without being terminally ill. Yeah, it reminds me of Soylent Green. And you remember that movie, Soylent Green? Edward G. Robinson's last movie? Charlton Heston was in it? Where you could just go and commit self-deletion. And of course, according in the movie, they take the bodies from the self-deletion process and make these like wafers called Soylent Green that were then distributed to people in a socialistic dystopia as food. But I don't think Canada's quite to that stage yet. I mean, it's certainly getting into the realm of dystopia, but I don't think it's recycling the bodies of the MAID program as some kind of new cereal, for example. So what are my thoughts on this assisted dying? Medical assistance in dying. Well, I do think that people should have the right to self-delete. I mean, it's your own life. I mean, it was mainly Christianity that put a taboo on that. In ancient Rome, sometimes it was the honorable thing to do. If you were a soldier who disgraced your legion, then you fall on your own sword. Unfortunately, Mark Antony botched falling on his own sword and didn't hit any vital organs, and it took him a while to finally die. But still, I mean, it's like Cato the Younger. He just, I think he either had a doctor do it or did it himself, but, he opened his veins was the term when he found out that Julius Caesar had won the Civil War and was going to become dictator for life after defeating Pompey's forces, Pompeius Magnus. But then along came Christianity, and a life was considered to be something sacred. It was like a sacred gift of God. So that committing suicide was a sin, and you couldn't be absolved of that sin either because you're dead after you do it. So like in Dante's Inferno, there's that special circle of hell just for people who self-deleted. I think you became a kind of tree in hell that would bleed human blood instead of sap. But yeah, I mean, it is a dystopian development in Canada, it seems to me. It's like, I mean, there's memes about it now. It's like, well, we got socialized medicine, but you've got this condition, then maybe we can fit you in for a doctor's appointment a year from next Wednesday. But have you ever considered self-deletion? We can fit you in real soon on that one. So, I mean, from a moral and karmic perspective, the people who are participating in this, not the ones who want to self-delete, but the people who are helping them to self-delete, maybe even like suggesting it. Yeah, I mean, they are killing from the Buddhist point of view. I mean, even euthanasia from the Buddhist point of view is still killing. I mean, it might not be as bad as, being like an axe murderer or something, but still, it is morally unwholesome to do that. So the people who are participating in it are definitely making karma, and not the best kind of karma. And I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, karma and morals go hand in hand. So let's see here. Government is helping people die. It's very controversial because it appears that people are getting this done without being terminally ill. Well, in a way, it's kind of purging the misfits, which, I mean, from a moral point of view, would be unwholesome, unskillful, but maybe from a political point of view, it might actually be beneficial because you're purging misfits. I mean, the misfits are purging themselves. I'm not saying that someone who's got terminal cancer or something is a misfit. It's just the people that are so maladjusted that they want to self-terminate even though they're not terminally ill. That's the kind of people I was referring to. And I mean, they have the right to do it. I mean, individually, it seems to me, from a larger, like, political point of view, I mean, it could be good for society for people that are self-destructive to just sort of not be in society. But, I mean, I really don't have a dog in this fight. Speaking of dogs, here she is again. Look at it. There you go. Oh, Tater always wants to be picked up too. So, let's see. My thoughts on the MAID program in Canada. Canada definitely, I mean, most of the Anglosphere is like drifting towards dystopia more and more. Cyberpunk dystopia. Like, the election of Donald Trump is one of the main brakes, just hitting the brakes in America and even starting to like move in a different direction. But like the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, I mean, they're all moving in a dystopian direction, which America would be moving in if the Democrats had won the election. It's all moving towards this culturally castrated, feminized quasi-Marxism with the purging of misfits through euthanasia. Or, I mean, if they're not even terminally ill, I don't even know if it would be euthanasia or not. So, yeah, I mean, there's worse things than medical assistance in dying. I think abortion would probably be worse than somebody just opting to end their own life. But I guess I answered that question. And I'm just going to move on to the last question, which is from Arain. And Arain says, and I'm not lagging. Look at, I'm moving my mouth and the words are coming out as I move my mouth. Oh, it started lagging again a little bit. Anyways, Arain says, according to Stefan Molyneux, noted philosopher Stefan Molyneux, a person has no moral obligation to tell the truth to a compulsive liar. What does Buddhist philosophy say about this? Well, I did actually hear some of that video with Stefan Molyneux, and he was saying that lying is only bad if you deceive someone in a way that harms them. And I don't know what he's basing his ethics on. I think because he's like an anarchist, I think he's just basing his ethics on the non-harming principle, or whatever it's called. I'm really not into anarchist philosophy, but I know that anarchist philosophy is largely based on like ahimsa, not harming others. So apparently he's got it worked out so that the morals or ethics of anything is based on harming of others, which is very different from Buddhist ethics, which are based on your own psychology, the effects that the action has not on somebody else, but on your own mind. So Stefan Molyneux saying that lying is only unwholesome if it harms somebody else. I mean, certainly that's not Buddhist. What happens, this hypothetical scenario here, where someone is trying to rip you off, let's say they're trying to lure some kid into their car so they can kidnap that child for nefarious reasons. Well, the kid has been warned by his parents, when strangers do that, don't get in the car. So the kid just runs away. So did that person, this predator, did he not do anything wrong because he didn't harm the kid? No, he obviously was trying to harm the kid and failed. It's like attempted murder. According to Stefan Molyneux, I assume, going with this kind of reasoning, you're trying to murder someone, you shoot at them and miss, you haven't done anything wrong because you didn't harm anybody. But from a Buddhist point of view, I mean, you have the intention and you make the effort, you're already doing something wrong. Actually succeeding is like the clincher, where, I mean, that pretty much locks you into the deepest level of doing something wrong in that category. But still, if you're trying to harm somebody and fail, still you've done something wrong. So Buddhist philosophy says that ethics are subjective. They're based on the effects your own actions have on your own welfare. If they're taking you farther away from enlightenment, taking you farther away from purity or wisdom or whatever it is, from the possibility of enlightenment, then that's bad, even if you don't harm anybody other than yourself. I don't know what Stefan Molyneux would think about someone like self-deception, or just like someone who's got like this weird fetish where they want to hurt themselves, or they want other people to hurt them. I remember there's a kid like that in school. I won't say his name, but when I was in grade school, there was this one kid. He was an unpopular, kind of shy, awkward kind of kid who would just antagonize bullies until they would beat him up. He did it repeatedly. He would just like pester them, just like follow them along, just saying this stuff, and they'd tell him to shut up and he wouldn't. He'd just keep following them around saying this, whatever it was that was bugging them, until finally they'd just start hitting him. And that was the whole point. I'm not exactly sure what the connection is here, but I mean, obviously this kid, he wasn't harming anyone really, not from the Stefan Molyneux's kind of attitude. He was in a way kind of harming himself through the agency of just antagonizing bullies until they beat him up. So, I mean, I wonder what Molyneux would say about someone who wanted to get beat up. I mean, would the bully be doing anything wrong by satisfying this guy's desires to get beaten up? So, I mean, Stefan Molyneux, in his non-harming principle, because he's like an anarchist and uses the non-harming principle as some sort of axiomatic guiding law, I guess, I assume. Yeah, I mean, I think that his basis for ethics is far inferior to the Buddhist basis of ethics, which is it's subjective. Whether something is wholesome or unwholesome depends on your mental states, and whether those mental states are taking you closer or farther away from like enlightenment, taking you closer or farther away from reality. But Molyneux, I mean, he might be a materialist or something along the lines of a materialist, just fully invested in samsara, who doesn't really think that there is a transcendence of samsara, in which case that the Buddhist ethic would be almost nonsensical to him. But I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, like I mentioned earlier, just being pissed off is immoral, or self-loathing is immoral. Any kind of unhappiness. I mean, it's weird in Buddhism, unhappiness is immoral. I mean, wallowing in certain kinds of happiness also is immoral. I mean, Buddhist ethics are about as finely tuned as ethics get. Just wanting to put salt and pepper on your food to make it taste better is just sort of borderline immoral. So, yeah, I'm assuming that Stefan Molyneux, being an anarchist, is invested in the non-harming principle and is using that, maybe arbitrarily, as a basis for what is and is not moral. So you have to actually harm another person for it to be immoral. And from the Buddhist point of view, or just from a really common sense point of view, that's pretty much nonsensical. Like if you're trying to harm somebody and fail, I mean, like even in the legal system, attempted murder is still a crime. It's not as serious as murder, but still attempted murder, or attempted fraud, or attempted theft, attempted burglary, attempted like molestation of a child, all of that is illegal and wrong, even though nobody may have been harmed at all. Other than the perpetrator, the person attempting this, is already poisoning his own mind with his evil intentions. So, yeah, I would say Stefan Molyneux, even though he refers to himself as a philosopher, is really not a first-rate philosopher going with this kind of ethic. That he's more interested in politics than in like the subtleties of ethics, it seems to me. I'm not sure what other anarchists, like, what is it, Michael Malice? Isn't he a well-known YouTube anarchist? Whether he would have the same kind of ethic as Stefan Molyneux with the non-harming principle and all that, I'm not sure. But I do think that Buddhist ethics are much more subtle, much more sophisticated, much more realistic than this largely arbitrary definition of what is right and wrong based on an anarchistic principle, like a political principle of non-harming, rather than like, why is harming so bad? I mean, maybe he should like dig a little deeper. You know, if this is based on non-harming, why is harming another being immoral? Why is that unethical? And if he's just saying, well, that's just what anarchists believe, that's just like an axiom that we accept dogmatically, then I mean, that's what his ethics are based on. That's like the foundation of his ethics is just like this arbitrary decision made by political anarchists. So, yeah, I do think that the Buddhist ethic of something is good if it is conducive to the happiness of others and, more importantly, your own happiness. You know, if something is conducive to your own happiness in the long term, then that's good. If it's conducive to your own unhappiness in the long term, that's bad. Or if it's like, if it increases your delusion and attachment and desire, that's bad. If it decreases your delusion and attachment and desire, that's good. I definitely think that it would be preferable, and not just because I accept it dogmatically as a Buddhist. It just makes a lot more sense to me. It seems more intelligent and sophisticated and realistic and plausible than just basing it on the Western anarchist non-harming principle, which I assume is what he's doing. Because I don't know why else he would say that lying is wrong only if it harms another person. But he's using justifications. I should get back to Stefan Molyneux and his video, his talk. I heard him saying that, like, a compulsive liar, let's say somebody's trying to rip you off or something, and one example he gives is not even somebody trying to rip you off. It's like somebody is planning a surprise party for you. Your mate is got a surprise party planned for you, and you know that she's doing that. So you pretend to be surprised, even though you're not surprised because you already knew it was going to happen. Well, he says, there's nothing wrong with that. That's probably a good thing. And from a Buddhist point of view, I mean, it's certainly not as bad as like really messing somebody up, which also messes yourself up. But still, I mean, any kind of dishonesty it's like betrayal of truth. It's like, how are you going to attain ultimate truth if you can't even be faithful with regard to conventional truth? If you don't consider even conventional truth to be something quasi-sacred, I mean, how are you going to like rise above that into like the highest truth? So, I mean, he can say that you can lie to somebody to protect somebody else, something like that. And there's this famous short story. I'm all over the place with regard to answering this question. It's the last one. We'll be done after this, so bear with me. But there is a famous short story, the fourth wise man, or the other wise man. I've mentioned this before, where you've got these 4 Persians, and they see the Star of Bethlehem in the west, and they know the Messiah has been born, and so they're going to go and offer their incense, frankincense, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, plus probably some other items, to this king that has been born. So 3 of them set off, but the 4th one, he's got some kind of business he has to do, but he says, I'll catch up with you on the road. So the first 3 take off, and this 4th wise man, this other wise man, this magi, he takes off late, and he keeps getting like not completely sidetracked, but delayed. Like, he's traveling through the desert, and he sees this guy who's almost dead of thirst and exposure lying by the side of the road. So he has to get up and help him, and he's nursing him back to health and giving him water and, treating the second-degree burns and all this, and taking him somewhere where he can be taken care of and not just leaving him abandoned there. And then he continues on his way after like a week. And finally, he gets to the Holy Land, and he's staying at this house. And this is right when King Herod has demanded the death of all the baby boys. And so the mother is terrified. She's got a baby boy in the house. This wise man is standing at the door, and when the soldiers of King Herod pound on the door and demand entry, he gives them this jewel. Maybe, I think it was like a giant pearl that he was going to offer to the Messiah. He brought these treasures with him, and he gives this treasure to this soldier and says, there are no babies here. And then it's like the bribe is accepted, and the soldier just announces, there's no babies, let's keep going. And so he saves this baby's life by telling a lie. He says, there's no babies here, have this pearl. And of course, the mother is just weeping tears of joy and gratitude. And so, from the Buddhist point of view, I mean, he did tell a lie, and it may be that he was trying to deceive this soldier, although the bribe was probably, what really convinced the soldier that there was no baby there, rather than him just saying there's no baby. But still, he tells a lie, and it saves the life of this baby. So, I mean, it's easily the lesser of 2 evils in that case. It may be that some Buddhist arahant that is mentioned in the Visuddhimagga, I mean, he wouldn't tell any lie at all, so he just remains silent. He wouldn't be under the same roof with a woman anyway. So, I mean, the good Buddhist would just be avoiding the situation. He wouldn't be under the same roof with this woman in the first place. But still, you're telling a lie that, I mean, you still have this effect on yourself. In a way, you're betraying the truth, and you're like lie detector tests. They test for like little signs of stress, like increased perspiration, increased heart rate, and so forth. Which, I mean, when you're telling a lie, as a general rule, at some level, you are uneasy about that because you're doing something wrong. Maybe a sociopath can pass lie detector tests with no problem because, he doesn't have that. But most of us, I mean, we just feel in our body that we're doing something wrong when we're telling a lie. And so if telling the lie is going to result in less suffering in the long run than telling the truth, according to me, you're better off just choosing the lesser of two evils in that case. But I mean, some hard-nosed Buddhists would just say, just avoid the situation, don't ever tell a lie, even if it's a tiny one. You know, it's like you just say, well, I knew this surprise party was going to happen, or you just remain silent, you know? So I've just completely left Stefan Molyneux standing on the road, I guess. But I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, telling lies is always wrong, but it might be less of a wrong than telling the truth in certain cases, or remaining silent, for that matter, in certain cases. So it's like the trolley problem, where you either let the trolley squish 10 people or you divert the trolley on its track so it only squishes one person. From the Buddhist point of view, what you should do is just do nothing and let the trolley squish 10 people. I mean, that's like really hard-nosed Buddhist ethics, because you have done nothing wrong. Just standing there, I mean, inaction is never unethical from a Buddhist point of view, because you're not doing anything. But, I mean, some people could argue, well, if you divert the trolley so it only squishes one person, I mean, you're responsible for the death of one person, but if you hadn't done that, 10 people would be squished. And so you could argue it'd be the lesser of two evils. It would not be completely good. There would be some killing involved due to your own action, but still it would be less than letting 10 people get squished. And so that's your choice to make. You have to take responsibility. Do you accept responsibility for, that one person being squished or that lie being told, if doing that results in less suffering overall? So I'm of the opinion that sometimes you may choose, you have the right to choose between the lesser of two evils. And telling a lie sometimes may be the lesser of two evils, but still it's like wrong. It is unethical. It is immoral from a Buddhist point of view. And I might as well stop at that and say what I should always say at the beginning, and I've only done once like a year ago, which is, if you have any questions you think I can answer, especially about Buddhism, especially Theravada Buddhism or early Buddhism, like pre-Theravada Buddhism, some Western philosophy, some Eastern philosophy, it's a little more hit and miss the farther away you get from like my particular fields of interest. Like I also have a degree in biology. I'm fairly good at biology questions too. And no more than 3 per person per episode, please. And also, like and subscribe if you have not done so already, and be happy.